The Grenlec debates, powering bright ideas.
You're watching the 11th season of the Grenlec debates. Please bear in mind that matches, topics, and positions are randomly selected by schools. The theme for the quarterfinals is litter and our environment. I am Rohan Bernard, your chairperson, and I call this house to order. And the motion is, be it resolved that littering is a symptom of a wider social malaise and cannot be tackled through legislation. The proposition, St. Joseph's Convent, St. George's. The opposition, Hillsborough Secondary. Please welcome the first speaker for the proposition.
Good afternoon all. According to the World Bank's Global Review of Solid Waste Management 2016, Trinidad and Tobago was ranked the biggest generator of trash per capita in the world, 12 times the world average of 1.2 kilograms per day. The Trinidad and Tobago's Litter Act, Chapter 3052, has penalties for littering up to $4,000 or 6 months imprisonment. Legislated penalties have not prevented Trinidad and Tobago from being among the most littered countries in the world. By this regional example alone, we unreservedly support the moots, be it resolved that littering is a symptom of a wider social malaise and cannot be tackled through legislation. I will lay the premise of our arguments, and my colleague will consolidate why legislation is ineffective in tackling this symptom. According to Sociology Dictionary, social malaise is a condition in which society operates ineffectively. It is an unawareness of a moral and social decline that evidence shows influences human internal thought and external actions. Social malaise is characterized by adverse norms, the lack of both environmental knowledge and ethics. This results in what Albert Bandura's theory proposes as the observing, imitating, and modeling of existing negative behavior. The moots therefore suggest that littering is symptomatic of this wider social problem that negatively impacts human behavior. The article, Litter, Its Impact on the Local Communities by Kingdom.org states, littering is one of the first signs of social decay. If we don't care about the litter, we are unlikely to care about other environmental issues that negatively impact our societies. Judges, a Wageningen University 2015 report entitled Effective Interventions on Littering Behavior of Youngsters established that litter is both an environmental and a sociological concern. We must not simply impose fines for improper disposal of trash, but correct the initial negative human attitude and behavior through interventions. Given that the Oxford Dictionary defines tackle as a determined and credible effort in problem solving, we affirm that due to the nature of legislation, it is deficient in holistically counteracting littering. Black's Law Dictionary defines legislation as the act of making or enacting laws. Its intended purpose is to regulate and deter. Litter laws provide that if you are caught littering, you face punishment. They require numerous trained personnel consistently monitoring societies for littering offenses. This involves great expense, which is unsustainable for countries such as ours. Our budget is meager, and this resonates to the extent that many Grenadians are unaware of the litter laws that are not being enforced. The proactive approach involves changing mindsets and social attitudes towards care for the environment. This approach, we contend, is far more economical and sustainable. Legislation is placed to tackle littering. However, the mindset of the masses remains unchanged, resulting in ineffectiveness. Many countries such as Norway, the US, and Singapore have abundant litter laws, yet they confirm that littering still persists. According to a Straits Times article, why is littering still a problem in Singapore? Government officials purport that, as a result of legal provisions for addressing litter, their citizens have become complacent. With cleaners out daily to sweep trash, many have developed the mindset that there is always someone somewhere to pick up after them. Additionally, a study done from 2009 to 2010 states that 4 out of 10 citizens said they would litter out of convenience if they could get away with it. As a result of Singapore's citizens' littering habits, laws are constantly being added and fines hit a 7-year high because of repeated offenses. By contrast, Japan is one of the cleanest countries in the world. The cleanliness is not driven by a fear of penalties, but in a culture of cleanliness embedded in the social consciousness of the people. The proactive approach of education in changing mindsets has been so successful that the Japanese take their culture of voluntary cleanliness wherever they go. Therefore, I ask you, my worthy opponents, when Japanese spectators cleaned up the World Cup stadium in Moscow, were they consciously complying with any legislation? I thank you.
The first speaker for the opposition.
Afternoon all, we oppose the motion, be it resolved, that littering is a symptom of a wider social malaise and cannot be tackled through legislation. We redefine key terms according to Cambridge Dictionary. Littering, spreading across an area or place untidily. Symptom, any single problem that is caused by and shows a more serious and general problem. Legislation, laws enacted and enforced. Wider includes many types of a particular thing. The Lexicon Webster Dictionary tackle to try to deal with a difficult problem. Social malaise, offenses against individuals and the built environment, with Jinxie 1999. The phrase wider social malaise is referring to many types of a social malaise. I will highlight that littering is not a symptom of a wider social malaise and show forms of legislation that tackle littering. Our second speaker will show that countless nations are tackling littering through legislation. Honorable Chair, the very definition of social malaise speaks to the fact that littering is indeed a type of social malaise. Not only have countless scholars attested to this, but simple logic and reasoning proves it. Your proposition concerning litter is like saying that the doctor deals with the symptom of cancer by not acknowledging that cancer is the issue. You see littering, you see a social malaise. No diagnosis necessary. Proponents, littering is not a symptom, it is a social malaise. There are many types of social malaise. Jo C. Young states, and I quote, littering is one of them, unquote. We, this global community, have issues. One of them is refusal to comply with social norms and laws accepted worldwide. Littering causes environmental degradation because of our non-compliance. Worthy judges, featured in the CSEC Social Studies text, a picture of our water in the Carnad St. George littered with garbage from land and sea users. Further into the region, the shores of Rotten, now choked with tides of plastic waste. Forbes 2017. Sickening is the story of Mount Everest, coined Mount Everest of excrement, The Telegraph 2015. Can legislation tackle this? Economics teaches that a negative externality such as littering requires legislation, regulation, and government intervention. Worthy judges, legislation and regulation does not happen by chance. They are governed by rules. The United Nations, UN, have established rules of law, which refers to principle of governance, which states that all persons, institutions, and entities, public and private, including the state itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promoted, independently adjudicated, and equally enforced. We examine forms of legislation that will tackle this social malaise. 3 aspects that we will deliberate are the conventions, where countries agree over a matter legally, such as through the United Nations; treaties, a formal agreement between countries, while acts are local legislations. Members of this Honorable House, conventions and treaties. As littering is a global social malaise, the uniting of countries to sign up under the conventions and treaties is imperative. Worthy proponents, things become significant when countries embed policies through acts that will incentivize and deter citizens from littering. The UN has signed a convention, Agenda for Sustainable Development, which aims to transform attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs of various nations to tackle the social malaise. Littering, UN Division for Sustainable Development Goals 2015. The convention caters to economic, social, and environmental issues which all intertwine. Proponents, our world has 195 countries. 193 are member countries of the United Nations. Are we still debating whether or not this type of social malaise can be tackled through legislation? Our very Education Act, Part 2, Division 1, Subsection 3.8 clearly highlights a specific goal to increase awareness and appreciation of the natural environment of Grenada and the need for its protection by all persons. Littering tackled both directly and indirectly through legislation. I thank you.
The second speaker for the proposition.
Good afternoon. I maintain my colleagues' definitions. Social malaise, we reiterate, is characterized by adverse norms, poor socialization, low income, and the erosion of value systems giving rise to many symptoms such as illegal drug use, vandalism, and even violence against women. These symptoms still persist despite worldwide legislation. Its failure lies in punishing the offenders and not addressing the root cause, a band-aid over a festering wound. Littering, like the symptoms named above, is a manifestation of social malaise where legislation has limited reach. Interventions are more successful. Society overcomes issues of malaise through energizing the population into becoming more educated, investing personally, and becoming aware of benefits that break this social problem. Consider this example. Littering in Jamaica was quite prevalent despite the 1986 Anti-Litter Act. The World Bank in 2013 initiated a solid waste management program in 18 high-risk communities. It utilized a strategy of result-based financing to improve disposal infrastructure, coupled with educational interventions and public participation. It went further to link the benefits of a clean community to the reduction of crime and violence. The World Bank 2018 Waste Management Report states that this improved the litter situation in the 18 communities. Its success was attributed to the community engagement through education and trust building that played a pivotal role in positive behavior change, especially since the World Bank took into consideration the local Jamaican context. Legislation did not achieve the same result. The European Environmental Agency 2015 article, Citizen Engagement to Solve Marine Littering, outlined a Strategy Framework Directive, MSFD, an initiative of the European Union to address the dilemma of littering. The EU recognized that legislation failed to deter persons from indiscriminate disposal of garbage. As a result, the MSFD engages citizens to solve this crucial problem by 2020. The data collected by the public will improve the understanding of marine litter, thus effectively tackling marine litter. A UNESCO article entitled Swashahagra, Creating a Culture of Cleanliness, affirms that Indian primary schools in Gujarat counteract a littering by instilling positive values in students to promote good environmental norms. They in turn influence their parents, creating a ripple effect that impacts not only their community, but also those across India where litter laws were deficient. Educational intervention and public participation, rather than legislation effecting positive social changes, have been found to be successful, not just in areas relating to littering, but also in many other areas of community development. Right here in Grenada, we experienced this effect during the revolutionary period, when cleanup and school day programs were implemented with success and without legislation. Judges, I'm sure that by now, even my worthy opponents are convinced that legislation cannot tackle the problem of littering, which is indeed a symptom of a wider social malaise. I thank you.
The second speaker for the opposition.
Our definition stands: littering, a physical disorder, incivility. Murray and Armitage, 2004. Honorable Chair, Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, allows countries worldwide to implement in their education systems, resulting in transformations in mindset, resulting in a cleaner world by tackling the very changing of our moral paradigm, empowering us to understand the importance of not littering, imperative to ensure continuity. Effective implementation of this is evident across our continents. In Japan, the institution pluralized environmental policymaking, waste management, and introduced many new anti-littering laws which have been effective. Shears, 2004, tackling proponents. In Ireland, Ireland devised effective means of the litter disposal, educating, monitoring, and evaluating its effectiveness. The Irish Times, 2018, tackling a question of enforcement proponents. The Minister of Legal Affairs, Honorable Kendra Maturin Stewart, stated, I quote, legislation is a must to tackle the social malaise, littering, unquote. In Grenada, legislation to tackle littering, the Litter Act of Grenada, the Waste Management Act 2001, and the Non-Biodegradable Waste Control Act 2018, referred to by Senator Simon Steele as, I quote, progressive legislation, unquote. These policymakers engage in control measures, educational campaigns, waste reduction, or law enforcement to tackle littering. In 2012, the Xan advisor in Botswana assessed the effectiveness in the 2007 litter laws, which showed there was significant litter reduction. Proponents' economic analysis of the law states, quote, people are predicted to abide by the law if sanctions are sufficiently severe, whereas they tend to break the law if sanctions for doing so are too mild, unquote. Polinsky and Chauvel, 2000. Jamaican Observer 2018 reported a new anti-litter act with higher fines was installed since the existing fines are not punitive. Murray and Armitage 2004 claim to control littering, one must have source control, educational campaigns, waste reduction, and law enforcement. Due to legislative strategies, litter entering South Africa has been significantly reduced. Right on our doorstep in Guyana, litter legislation has proven effective in Georgetown. In 2013, 269 people were fined. Guyana News 2013. England, a reduction of more than 85% in the use of plastic bags was reported after a 5-pence charge. House of Commons 2017. And in Plymouth, UK, an 80-pound charge for cigarette butts. As a result, 43 fixed penalty notices were issued in 1 week. A deterrent established. Law and economics rediscovered the importance of social norms in compliance with the law. Election 1991. Proponents, legislation teaches environmentally acceptable actions, reinforce behavior traits, deter littering. Honorable Chair, we cannot close our argument by failing to mention Singapore, the fine city known for its impeccable cleanliness achieved through stringent legislative enforcement. Littering, a type of social malaise, can be tackled through legislation. I thank you.
The opposition cross-examiner.
Are you aware of United Nations conventions and their purpose?
My worthy opponent, I am aware of it.
So you are agreeing with saying that they are international laws and hence they are legislations?
Conventions do not mean legislations, my worthy
According to the
opponent.
International Labour Organization, they are international laws, hence they are legislations. In light of this, has your team considered this?
My worthy opponent, when we say legislation, we do not refer to the conventions that the UN has put in place because they are not local legislation.
They are local legislations and international legislations. They are legislations, opponents. So don't limit your argument to anti-litter. Don't litter your argument to anti-litter legislations. Are you aware that the prerogative to educate and create awareness, as you have mentioned, is given by legislation, both directly and indirectly?
My worthy opponent, how so?
Directly as in the anti-litter laws which you have mentioned, and indirectly through these conventions. As you have stated, we need to educate in order to stop the littering, to tackle the littering, sorry.
Has this education been effective, my worthy opponent?
As your first and second speaker stated,
no,
they have been
education
successful.
coming from our legislation, has it been effective? Has it been enforced?
Without the legislation to educate and create awareness, we cannot campaign what the
non-government organizations
create awareness.
Create awareness all the time, my worthy
yes,
opponent.
Yes, exactly, and they have the right to do this. This is in the legislation.
My worthy opponent,
don't limit your argument to
Abatement
anti-litter
Act
laws.
Of 2015 gives no rise to any institutions to educate or
our Education Act, worthy opponent. Our Abatement of Litter Act gives penalties for littering. Our Education Act provides the prerogative to educate, to stop the litter.
And has this education been occurring, my worthy opponent?
As you have mentioned, we need to campaign and create awareness in order to stop it.
The campaign and creation of awareness has been as a result of non-government organizations, not from the Education Act that you're citing.
If they did not have the right in the legislation to do this, it would be illegal.
It's illegal to educate, my worthy opponent?
Because it is not, because it is in the Education Act. What would you propose to happen if, what would you like to see happening for you to agree that legislations can tackle littering?
Nothing can convince me that education can can tackle littering, primarily because littering is a symptom of a social malaise, meaning penalties and punishment cannot affect this society's mindset.
It is a type of social malaise, what the opponent.
It is
not
a symptom.
And as we are debating today whether it can be, which means it is a possibility. And as we have proven before, countries like Japan,
penalties
Singapore,
do
England,
not change
Solomon
social
Islands,
attitudes, my worthy
these
opponent.
countries have tackled littering through legislation. So this
They have
proves
not
that there is
tackled
a
littering,
possibility.
they have tackled litter. They have effective waste management policies which keep their streets clean, but the society is still littering.
Which controls littering.
This deterrent is not effective, seeing
According
as people
to
are still
the
littering.
The proposition cross-examiner.
Worthy opponent, do you agree with me that sometimes people litter unconsciously?
Yes, well, the opponent persons litter unconsciously. This doesn't say that legislations cannot tackle this
My worthy
problem.
opponent, one of the objectives of legislation is to deter offensive behavior, yes?
Yes, well, the opponent.
So, does any of the legislation that you've read provide for making the population more aware about avoiding littering?
Yes, well, the opponent. Legislations in general, example, the Education Act as provided right here in Grenada.
So people walk around thinking about those acts.
Part 2, please let me finish. Part 2, Division 1, subsection 3 states that it is our right to create awareness for the love of our environment in order to protect it.
You do not need the legislation to tell you to create awareness.
You need
Moving
the
on, my
May I
worthy
please
opponent.
answer? You need the legislation with the opponent in order to create this awareness. Otherwise, it would have been illegal to aware a person.
My worthy opponent, effective campaigns, brightly colored bins. People who unconsciously litter are reminded more by engaging tactics than legislation. Can you explain why countries with stringent litter legislation have failed to arrest the problem, and yet Japan, which has no penalties for littering, has managed through a culture of cleanliness to tackle the problem?
As my speaker stated, Japan has laws in place, legislations in place, which has significantly reduced the littering problem from 50 million tons to 43 million tons, were the opponent. And we are debating whether it is possible to tackle legislations, and since, as we have proven, Japan, Solomon Islands and England can tackle, not solve what the opponent, can it tackle it, try to deal with the problem.
My worthy opponent, it cannot be an attempt as it cannot change society's mind.
I need to move on, my worthy opponent.
The primary objective of litter legislation is to create offences, yes?
Pardon?
The primary objective of litter legislation is to create offences, yes?
To deter persons and to put laws in place in order to control the littering.
To create offences.
To control the littering problem, yes.
And the penalty imposed for most of these offences is a fine, yes?
Yes, what the opponent?
Isn't this a rather obtrusive way of raising revenue for the state and not a genuine effort to tackle the littering problem?
The aim of these legislations are not to raise funds for the state or the opponent. They are in place to control. And these, because the fines serve as a deterrent, no one wants.
And the fines are constantly rising, which means they are not working, my worthy opponent.
They are rising, creating deterrents for the opponent. They are rising as a matter of
How high will they have to rise
legislations
before we realize that they are just not going to work?
They are working, as my speakers have proven. This proves that legislation
if they were
can
working,
tackle.
Why do they keep rising?
To tackle. Because the countries are continuously making enhancements in their legislations in order to deal with the issue of littering.
Because it still persists. My worthy opponent, do you agree with me that the most effective means of bringing about positive attitudinal change in human behavior is through education, public awareness, incentives, and campaigns?
Yes, as my speaker.
The opposition rebuttal speaker.
Afternoon all. My proponents have endeavored to litter our honorable judge's mind with the idea that littering is a symptom of a social malaise and cannot be tackled through legislations. I will refute their erroneous claims. Your first speaker stated that countries do not have finances and lack values and moral implementation of said legislation. But as we stated, the purpose of the conventions, which are legislations, like the United Nations Decade for Sustainable Development, DESD, that address environmental problems. So in accordance to these international laws, these conventions provide monetary and human resource initiative in correlation to the aim and stipulations of these laws, which governs all 193 nations in the UN. Furthermore, the concept of legislation put forward by proponents is very limited to the fact that they disregard the indirect forms of legislation. In accordance to my first speaker, evidence of this, our very own Education Act Part 2, Division 1, Subsection 3H, clearly highlights a specific goal to increase awareness and appreciation of the natural environment of Grenada and its needs for protection by all persons. Your speaker also stated that legislation would not be effective in combating the problem of littering. However, the purpose of this debate isn't to determine the effectiveness of said legislation. You also stated that legislation would be ineffective in tackling littering. But my second speaker has given sufficient examples of legislation that has been implemented and effective in dealing with littering. For example, Japan has institutions that pluralize environmental policy making, waste management, and introduce new anti-litter laws, which have been effective since 2004. Littering in Japan has decreased from 50 million tons in 2006 to 43 million tons in 2007. World Economic Forum, 2018. Due to these legislations.
The proposition rebuttal speaker.
Good afternoon all. My worthy opponents, conventions are not laws that countries have enacted into their constitutions, but rather they are projects of non-governmental organizations which help global issues in the world, and they also fight issues that cause problems in societies. Your first speaker defined legislation as laws enforced and enacted. But is this really sustainable? What the opponent, do you see the litter laws of Grenada being enforced? Where are the wardens that these laws legislate to be on the ground, looking at persons who are affecting litter? Dear worthy opponents, can the 269 persons that you talk about that got fined in Guyana, are they really do they truly represent the entire population as to what the amount of persons who may litter? What about the amount of trash that may still be on the streets? You mentioned littering being the physical disorder, but Bandura's theory suggests that it's the external forces that cause the negative behavior to persist. Littering is a symptom of a social wider malaise. And since you spoke of the direct and indirect influences of litter, you have agreed with us because of the proactive initiatives which can be taken to avoid it. What the opponent, education does not have to be formal as specified by Education Acts, but it can also be in the instance of Jamaica, where these initiatives from the United Nations, the World Bank, Caribbean Development Bank, and other non-governmental organizations occur. These projects go into communities and other places where issues can be resolved, such as litter. Policies are not based on law. Since you want the law to take a reactive instead of a proactive approach, why don't we start tackling the problem of littering in a serious and proactive manner instead of a reactive approach of fines? Why introduce a command and control approach over persons when you can simply educate them as to why they should not litter?
And the winner is St. Joseph's Convent, St. George's. Thank you for joining us. Please tune in for the rest of Season 11 of the Grenlec Debates. Visit us on Facebook to vote for your favorite debater.
The Grenlec Debates. Powering bright ideas. Vote for your favorite debater on our Facebook page. The Grenlec Debates. Powering bright ideas.